Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets to help you on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you for joining us for another episode of conversation around responsible fatherhood and family. I'm always trying to bring you new perspectives and on some of the topics that you guys email me about, text me about, and wanting to hear more about. And one of those subject matters is child support. And I just, had to go after the foremost top expert in the country to bring her to you today, Dr. Jessica Pearson. She is one of the co-directors of the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network, more affectionately known as FRPN. It was a 5-year initiative. I believe it still is a part of that 5-year initiative by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. No, you guys are on your own. You're doing your thing, right?
Funding ended actually in 2019. We stretched it a little bit to 2020. And since then, Center for Policy Research, the nonprofit I direct, has been funding it and keeping it alive. And the other thing is that since then, Jay Fagan has retired.
I didn't know that.
My co-director is, so I am the director, the queen, however you want to put it.
All right. That's breaking news, y'all. Only here on I Am Dad podcast. I'm bringing you breaking news. So Dr. Jessica Pearson is the director of the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network. Let me say it the right way. So listen, let's jump right into this because I want to get you out of here. Dr. Pearson, we start our podcast off with an interesting question. I started doing it some months ago and people just absolutely love it. My guests never expect it. Sometimes they expect it, sometimes they don't. But my very first question to you today is, what is your daddy story?
Oh, well, I had a wonderful dad. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a very rough neighborhood called East New York.
Wait, hold on, stop the presses right there. First of all, I never knew you were from Brooklyn. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I was born and raised in Crown Heights. I went to PS 221, then I went to Winthrop, and then I graduated from Erasmus Hall. But when I came back home from the military, my mother moved to what was then Pickens Avenue and Stone Avenue in East New York. So we lived the latter part of our life in East New York. Now, where were you in East New York?
Okay, I was born on Williams Avenue and Sutter, and then I moved up Sutter to Sutter and Van Sicklen. I used to take the A train. A Sutter Avenue stop. I would walk to the New Lots train station for 7th Avenue line. I went to Thomas Jefferson High.
Wow.
And junior high school 149, and I was a public school rat and in very tough neighborhood, East New York.
Yes.
I lived through block busting, which was just devastating to the neighborhood. It was perpetrated by realtors who were just greedy and got people scared about Black people moving into the neighborhood, and within a very, very short period of time, the neighborhood there was a huge demographic shift. There was a lot of poverty in the neighborhood, a lot of hurt and want. And so that was my childhood. And my parents were both immigrants, basically. Their families had come to the US really to escape Nazism and Russia, the Russian Tsar who had a draft that lasted 25 years, and they moved to the Lower East Side. They grew up on the Lower East Side in New York, and then moved to Brooklyn, the burbs in those days, and that's where I grew up.
Wow.
So,
man, I have a whole new love for you now. Now I can get to say on all the other things I get to say, and she's my homie. I get to say that.
I'm from your hometown, and I know Crown Heights.
And so, and I know that just threw me way off track, but I do have to say this to you. I bet you don't know this. On Prime Video, if you have Prime Video, there is a new cop drama show called East
New York. Yeah, I watched the first episode.
Oh my goodness, you feel like you're at home. I'm on the last.
I know. I watched it just for the visuals. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to make sure that you knew it. When I saw that,
I know it.
I was
like,
I
knew
oh
about
my goodness. I was like, sometimes they'll show a store and I'll remember it. I'm like, I know where that store is.
Yeah.
I know where that
the
corner is.
Or the Linden projects or whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So we digress. So let's get back to child support because child support is one of those conversations, Dr. Pearson, that is very difficult to have because of the emotion that is attached to it.
Right.
And the complexity of it, right? The nuance of what it is and what people feel about it and what they think about it. From your perspective, being a researcher, how hard has it been for you to actually do the research side of it, knowing what the emotional side of it is?
Well, I've been involved with studying the child support program and really kind of testing out in demonstration projects, new approaches that we're supposed to or are supposed to be more responsive to the needs of low-income families.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that they necessarily are. I don't know if they haven't necessarily succeeded, but really my whole career has been involved with a period of evolution of the child support program from a totally punitive narrow enforcement approach to something that is hopefully a little more holistic and more responsive to the needs of the population that the child support program serves.
Mm-hmm.
It started off, like when it was created in in 1975, it was really to just support widows and divorced women and their children. At that time, there were very few children. The rate of out of wedlock or unmarried births was very low. Mm-hmm. And it was aimed at making sure there was some support for those divorced women and reimburse the state for welfare that was paid to custodial parents, largely women and children. And that was the purpose of the program. And that's why that's its goals: establish paternities, establish an order, collect, get arrears paid off, be cost effective. And it's pretty narrow. And I think over time, as time has gone on, the population that the child support program serves has changed. Mm-hmm. There's now more and more never married parents. Mm-hmm. There are more people who aren't solidly in the workforce in a 40-hour per week job with an employer who can easily pay withhold child support from wages, do wage withholding. We have more self-employed people, gig workers,
Mm-hmm.
people who are working under the table, people who are doing all kinds of things
Mm-hmm.
who, and they're not as connected to the regular workforce. We have more and more larger share of the child support population. In addition to being never married, we have formerly incarcerated uh,
Mm-hmm.
parents who have a hard time getting into the workforce and earning the money that will allow them to survive themselves and support new families and also pay child support. So it's become a very different population grafted on to a program that was created in another time in history. And also, there are some misconceptions that America has about, how you support families and how you support children.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have this idea of individual responsibility, and I'm all for individual responsibility, but it's a little bit of a mythology that individual responsibility alone is what makes a society um, healthy and keeps children well supported. Other societies have better safety nets, they have
Mm-hmm.
childcare, they have better preschool kind of support, they have better medical support, they have other safety net programs that help. Some of them have a child allowance that they pay that combines with child support. America only has child support, and we've seen that it may be a little inadequate, not up to the job of really supporting all children
Right. You know,
in the fashion that they need.
yeah, one of the things that I've always kind of thought about when it comes to child support is that there's this like admirable, almost honorable side of how some policymakers and judicial people and other folks think about child support, which is this is the money for the children and it goes through the
Mm-hmm.
mom.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that's counter that is counter that perspective, right? And so whenever you
Right.
start talking about fathers, the conversation becomes no, because if we help fathers and we do that, we're taking monies away from mothers and children.
Right.
And
Right.
that's the emotional tie you see, right?
Well, you see that it does become kind of a, if you win, I lose. If I lose, you win, And the bottom line is that, Kenny, that there's not enough money to go around that for what people need. We have typically two poor parents
Mm-hmm.
who have low education levels and don't have enough income, and there are a lot of children to support between their current families and other families, and it's like mathematically like impossible. You
Right.
can't do it. And so it's not but I'm not going to, say that raising kids is expensive. I'm not going to say that it can be done on the cheap. Anybody who's done it
Right.
knows, and that and it's not just shoes and other kinds of visible things, but it's rent and it's utilities and
Mm-hmm.
it's all the invisible things that goes into
Mm-hmm.
living and caring for children. And so it's really a very, very challenging situation, and it's hard to be, quote unquote fair, and it's
Right.
hard to
Mm-hmm.
figure it out when the dollars really just don't add up to
Mm-hmm.
what they need to be.
Absolutely. When you think about the research that you're doing today, like what are you finding that frustrates you the most? Because for me, I started out in New York State child support enforcement. So I know child support very intimate from both
Okay,
the state
I
level
didn't know
and
that you
the,
worked there.
Yeah, and the
Okay.
county, my fatherhood program, when I was running the New York State Fatherhood Initiative, it was within the child support office, right? And it was interesting
Right.
because when it started, we were under Governor Pataki at the time, and Robert Dorr was my
Yeah,
commissioner.
I
He
know
was the one who
Robert.
hired.
Yeah.
He hired me. He hired
Right.
me. And so he was my boss. And then him and David Hansel flipped jobs. He went to New York and David Hansel came to OTDA and David became my boss. And
Right.
I never forget Dr. Pearson. He comes in, he calls me into his office and he says, "Hey," he says, "I want to talk to you about something." And at the time, I was in workforce development. I wasn't in child support. And he says, "I want to move you to child support." And I was like, "No." I was like, "That's not a good idea." And he said, "No, I think it's going to be best." And I was like, "I don't think that's going to be a good idea." And he
Right.
says, "Listen, let me explain to you why I want to do it." He says, "You are extremely respected in this building." He says, "If anybody is going to have an impact on how child support thinks about fathers, it's going to be you. And I need you at the head of the table
Hmm.
in New York State to help them begin to see what we're trying to get them understand." And I
Right.
resisted so hard, but you know what? It was the best thing that ever happened to me because I got in
Good.
the belly of the beast and I began to understand
Yeah.
it and I began to meet people and I began to
Right.
talk about it and I could really kind of
Right.
like strip it apart. And now that's the
Right.
thing that I recall when I think about that. But when you're doing, as you're doing your research today, like what frustrates you the most in terms of something that hasn't changed, that needs to change?
Well, what has a lot of things have not changed. Um, we have, we're getting to the idea that we should um, base orders on actual income and not impute earnings and not sort of make them up. We should try to use actual information, but we don't have, that's imperfect. We've made improvements. We've made some improvements in what's called early intervention, reaching out to people early on and sending out understandable notices. As a, in the old days, you parents would just get slammed with the notice, and by the time they got notified, they were behind months and months and months, or years and years. um, we still, some states still charge interest on child support that's higher. Unpaid child support, interest rates are up now a little bit, but man, they were pretty low for a long time. And we still had states that were charging 10 to 12% or 2 to 9%, quite a lot of interest. And that generates arrears, which get compounded over time and become terrific burdens. And we
Mm-hmm.
have research that shows that more fathers drop out of the system when they are faced with unpayable arrears, and has bad effects on their kids, well-being of their kids, and they fight with the other parent. There's more conflict, so that's upsetting. I think the fact that we don't have ways of wiping away arrears
Mm.
and sort of debt compromise, is frustrating to me. That after all of these years, we have the debt level in child support debt has grown to $115 billion
Wow.
nationally. Now, we know, and most of that is held by very low income people. There's no way that they're going to get out of it. It
Mm-hmm.
accumulated. The meter was running while they were incarcerated,
Mm-hmm.
because now you're not supposed to run it while you're incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
The states are supposed to turn it off, and they should turn it off. Not all states do, uh, but that's not going to be paid. And there's got to be a way to discharge that and to compromise it and try to get people to in a situation where they can pay some of it,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and then be out from under. And we have to stop repaying. A lot of that money is owed to state and the federal government for previous paid welfare. We got to get rid of that. We shouldn't be trying to balance the books on the backs of poor people that way. We have enough corporate welfare. We shouldn't be trying to, we don't get strict about that. We should not be trying to repay the state for past welfare off the backs of poor people. We should be encouraging them to do what they can to support their families now. So that's frustrating to me. And also, I think that solving the child support problem really involves a bigger problem for our society. To get people in a position where they can work and earn, they have to be educated, they have to have job skills, we have to have job training programs at work, we have to have we have to let people who have a criminal background to be able to get into employment and not be excluded because of past mistakes and problems that they've had earlier in their life. So we need a larger society that supports people, and so that it's not just a payment problem today. It goes to a bigger investment in low income, and I have to say, for the most part, low income, poorly educated men, often men of color, who have multiple children by different partners, and have incarceration in their past, and they're in an untenable situation financially, and they need more societal support, and we need prevention so that their children don't get into the same straits.
We here, we have a fire grant here in Georgia, and it is, we are doing an awesome job here in Atlanta, and I'm sure you are aware of the legitimation laws here in the state of Georgia.
Oh gosh, yes.
Right.
The only state in the country.
The only state in the country, and I'm working at it so hard. We are banging around the edges, but what I want to do is I want to create proof of concept, and proof of concept looks like this. And I know you have to go, and I want to roll into.
No, that's okay.
I want you to talk about the state by state report, and that's what I'm leading into. And so the complexity with respect to child support also occurs at how it is mandated at the federal level, administrated at the state level, and implemented at the county level, and distributed at the family level, right? And so all of that, and then it looks that way 50 different ways from across the country. Right?
At least 50 different ways.
At least 50.
Colorado has 65 counties. It's like 65 nations. There's states with 180 counties.
Well, Georgia has 200 and
something different.
Right, we got 200 and some odd states, counties down here. It's really
crazy.
Just out of. So you in your work you have also not solely just looked at child support, but you've also very intentionally looked at policy and programs, right?
Right.
And looked at what the feds are trying to accomplish with respect to providing services.
Right.
And you just released a report called Policies and Programs Affecting Fathers, a state-by-state report. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I looked around and I saw that, the Kids Count book, I have it right here, Annie E. Casey Foundation. They have Kids Count book. Every year they do a state by state. How is this state look on children's health? How does this state look on child well-being rankings by state, on education, on health, on family and community. The Children's Defense Fund does that for children. I said, well, where's the book for fathers? Where are we looking? Where's the book that sort of looks at how states are doing on their policies to support fathers? And so we can, where's our baseline, and why aren't we tracking that every year? Why aren't we looking and seeing who's improving the minimum wage? Who's improving the EITC? Who's improving healthcare for fathers, for men, public health for men? Who's dropping, which states are not charging any interest in child support? Which states have employment programs for unemployed fathers in the child support program, or underemployed fathers? Let's look state by state on what they're doing to which states have a lot of low-income people in their workforce, or their workforce training programs. Let's go systematically in these basic areas of public life, like child support, like child welfare, and maternal, child in health, and family law. What are states doing about custody? Legitimation comes right in there. Georgia stands alone in sort of setting up at least double hoops that fathers have to jump through. You can't just acknowledge paternity. You have to go and pursue a legitimation process, and with the goal of establishing a baseline and hopefully tracking that and following and creating a little bit of accountability and pressure. I mean, we put a lot of money in home visiting. I'm all supportive of home visiting, but we don't keep any records of father participation in home visiting. Wow. It's not required by the federal government. We do that for the Head Start and Early Head Start program, but not part of the home visiting program. So in a way, we haven't really considered father participation. We have it in our tracking, our measurement systems. They don't collect information about the father, and we don't know about, and we know even less about any participation or policies by race, because we don't really keep good racial data or ethnic data so that we can say, is this policy disproportionately affecting fathers of color? And in the child support area, that it's on child support systems in some states. Sometimes it's I don't know what New York, how it treated it, but it can be just not a mandatory field, so workers can fill it out, race information or not. So sometimes it gets filled out, sometimes it doesn't. We need to have it routinely filled out, and we need to look and see if driver's license suspension is disproportionately affecting non-custodial parents of color, if cooperation requirements are disproportionately affecting custodial parents of color, if they're being required because they are using public benefits programs. We have to see if our interest policies on unpaid child support are affecting obligors of color. Illinois recently dropped interest because they did that analysis and they said, you know what, it's racially unfair. Wow. And they dropped their interest charges. So sometimes data can help change policy. That's what I'm hoping to accomplish. And that's why I decided to do that. No one supported us. We couldn't get funding for it. And we just did it. I just wanted to do that. It was my COVID project. I did it
Yeah,
during
well, you
COVID.
know what? And I have you with me, so and this is my podcast, so I can say this to you now. And I wholeheartedly believe this. I've never said it to you, but I do really believe that I failed you when I was trying to bring you in closer to the clearinghouse. But there, it was just elements of the federal government that I could not break through, right? Personalities that I could not break through. Those things don't exist anymore. And so I'm
Okay,
really thinking about how to amplify your voice, how to amplify your work, how to amplify, because we're
that's
having some
sweet.
challenges as well, right? And so here's a challenge, and I want you to respond to both of these challenges. One of the challenges, if you look at the clearinghouse, we haven't had a lot of conversation about child support for whatever reason, right? But it's very difficult to have a conversation about child support the way practitioners, researchers, and the federal government wants to have a conversation about child support. Different from the way fathers want to hear about child support, right?
Right,
And so when you want to have a child support conference or roundtable and you want to bring fathers in, the issues that these guys want to talk about, nobody wants to talk about. They don't want to
right,
address those issues, which is what continues to perpetuate their hatred for the system itself because they believe there's no humanity in it. And we've
right.
been really trying to figure out how to bridge those gaps, but there's certain things that child support just can't say. The second thing is, I also believe, and this is only because I've been in the belly of this space, and I've watched this, and that is that when we are trying to attempt, and Vicky tried this, and others have tried it since then, to really shift the branding of child support to be a service, right? Not an enforcement agency, but a service. And I think one of the biggest barriers for that to occur, for child support to be seen by fathers as a service, is performance measures. You can't position yourself as a service for non-custodial parents when your performance measures demand that you perform, and perform
Right,
meaning collect child support. So those two
right,
things don't match with each other.
right.
And as long as those exist, we're never going to be able
Yeah,
to do.
I agree with you, Kenny. And what I propose in this report is we need a different performance measure. I
Mm,
would say one measure would be here are six progressive policies that support fathers, low income fathers. I would give, I would say if you adopt all six, you get an A. If you adopt five of those six, you get a B. If you adopt
mm,
four or six, in other words, if you have a self-support reserve that's above a certain poverty level, that then you should get credit. If you charge no interest, then you should get credit. If you pass through child support to families and 100% to families, or you're generous, then you should get credit. If you have a good employment programs with your child support, then you should get credit.
mm.
Let's change the freaking performance measure, because
Right,
then we have, that's performance.
right,
Why aren't
absolutely.
we valuing that kind of performance?
Right. Yeah, no, it's just, it's frustrating because, on the ground. So one of the things I learned this with my program in New York, I've seen it around the
Yeah,
country, and now I'm seeing it here in Atlanta with our fire program. So in our data, we collect top needs. Tell us your top three needs when you fill out our intake form.
right.
For the past 2 years, the top need has been legal service, legitimation, child support number two, um, housing number three. This year, 2022, number one is still legal, legitimation. Number two is housing. Number three is mental health. Number
Mm,
four is child support. Child support is
mm,
sliding down the latter.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've looked at data to try to figure out what's going on in the child support space that is now no longer a priority for fathers in the state of Georgia. And what we found is the demographics of the fathers who are coming into our space, 75% of them are, well, only 25% of the ones who are coming into our program are unemployed. When I was in New York, it was the exact opposite. It was the
Right.
exact opposite. And not only that, only 50, I think the number was only 15. I have to look at it again. It's like 15 to 18% of the dads that are coming to our space have child support arrears of the ones that's paying child support. And so when we begin to
That's
talk to them,
better.
yeah, when we begin to talk to them, it is what we've learned is that dads don't have a problem paying child support. They only have a problem when they can't pay child support. It's not
Right.
don't want
Right.
to pay child support.
Right.
It's
Right.
they can't pay child support because of
Yeah.
whatever the situation is.
Right.
And that is one of the things that I've been trying to drum up, that this whole notion that dads are out there
Right.
trying to dodge child support
Right.
is a myth. It's a lie. It's not happening.
Right.
If you give
Right.
these guys the resources they need, the support they need, and the value their voices in the spaces, particularly when it comes to getting custody and parenting time with their children, the research says that when they have, and this is a dissertation that Dr. Shalonda Smith did here in Georgia around legitimation, and she used to work for child support. She actually did the report when she was in child support. I have to send it to you because it's a really interesting dissertation.
Uh-huh. I'd
Anyway,
like
in
to
the
see it.
report, she talks about how fathers are more likely to pay child support when they have both visitation and custody, less likely when they have just visitation and not custody, even less likely when they don't have both. And
Right.
so their
Right.
desire to pay child support is connected to their connection to their children. And we're not figuring that out. And that's a portion of the
Right.
work that still
Right.
remains, to me, is still left to remaining to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're now, I'm now working with on this big domestic violence project and in child support, and I'm worried about what it's going to mean for fathers and father involvement because I mean, domestic violence is a horrible problem,
Hmm.
and yeah, we have to preserve the safety or ensure the safety of custodial parents or parents in parenting time and child support. But I don't want all men to be branded
Hmm.
as abuse. I mean, I'm worried about that it might detract from, you know,
Hmm.
then there are extreme cases. There are
Hmm.
always going to be extreme cases, but you don't make policy for the extremes. You make
Hmm.
policy for, you got a bell curve. You make policy for most people, and then
Hmm.
you take care of extreme cases.
Hmm.
That's what I think. But I'm worried about that, Kenny, and that's
Well,
something
no,
that we
make sure
have
you
to.
pull our voice into that because I've long since said, and it still remains true, even when we're talking about domestic violence, and that is, my preface statement always is while we are clear that 95% of all domestic violence cases are perpetrated by men, not all men are perpetrators. And we,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And the number of those who perpetrate is small compared to those who do.
Right,
And we even
right.
asked a question in our intake. We asked the question, do you have a protection order against you?
Yeah, right.
Have you ever been, arrested for a domestic violence incident? But then we asked a third question that's also important for these fathers because of what's happening with many of them, and that is, have you ever been a victim of domestic violence?
Right, right.
Right?
And a lot of them have been,
Yes.
and both as children and as adults. And you should ask not only about legal action, but ask them about if they've been, if they've used violence as
Right.
in their lives, because
Mhm.
the legal system doesn't always catch up. But
One of the things that I've always been concerned about, which is why I'm so crazy about, performance measures as it relates to grantees, and they tried it one time before, it didn't go anywhere. I think that they just got bored with the fight itself, and that is attaching performance measures of grantees to outcomes. Like, right, so how much money you're spending and what is the outcomes. To your point, if child support arrears are continuing to go up, then why are we spending all this money on father? That argument could be made, right? And so
Right,
you got to be real conscious about making sure that
right,
you're setting your grantees up for success. One of the
right.
suggestions has always been, and I, don't have a dog in this fight. I mean, it would help me, is that the funding particularly for grantors or grantees, should be longer. Those should be 10-year grants, not 4-year grants. Because what
Mhm.
happens, and if you notice, the number of grantees over the last 4 iterations of the fatherhood grants, if I'm not mistaken, the number is somewhere around 65%, if not higher than that, turnover each iteration of the grant, meaning
Mhm.
that 65%
Mhm.
of the people who are doing the work don't exist anymore. And the same thing could hold true. And I remember Vicky saying this to me one time before, and she said, Kenny, do you know that every 4 years, about 70% of the 4D directors change? And you have to
Mhm.
come back and you have to have the conversation all over again,
All over again.
all over
Yeah,
again. And so, Dr.
yeah,
Pearson, I think it is trying to find a way to create a sustainable conversation around what we're doing so that we don't have to
yeah,
go beneath the radar, so we can stay above the radar and
yeah,
continue to press what we're doing. That's what I want you and I to get our heads around, particularly when it comes to programs and child support and data specifically, because data doesn't lie. And if we can keep data in the forefront of people and really make sense out of what's working, what's not working, what we could use help for, what we can't use, what we can't get from them, and then what are the other supportive mechanisms that we should be looking at. You made a great point about the state commissions. Why aren't people petitioning the states to put money into this, right? It's always the federal government. Why isn't money being put
but
in at the local level? Like, why aren't there city commissions and county commissions and state commissions?
exactly, exactly. Well, I think that's why, in a way, I've been thinking that we needed these fatherhood grants to be formula grants for the states, so there would be some state buy-in. Maybe the states would have to match them, but every state would get something and be told, start a fatherhood program. It sounds like you're doing work to try to change state policy. Most fatherhood programs do not get into the policy realm. They just enroll, deliver deliver a curriculum, and flush.
Right.
And that's
You can't if you're looking at long term. I have to tell people often, even though we're doing great, the measure of my success won't be seen for 15 years,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so the measure of my success is not in the dad I serve, it's in the outcome of the child he raises, right? And
right.
so 15 years from now, I want to be in a restaurant somewhere and a kid walks up to me and says, "Hey, I remember you, Mr. Braswell. You're the guy that ran that program that my father went through.
Yeah,
And I remember my father's life changing as a
yeah,
result of who you were. And
right,
as a result of that, I have become who I am," right? That's the long term goal. It's not just about the unemployment number or the employment number or how many hours of curriculum they're taking or how many, the number of DV cases we reduce. All that stuff is important, but that's not the thing at the end of the day. At the end of the day, what are we doing to raise the ability of parents to be able to
right.
co-parent regardless of what their relationship should be, which is what I say. Just because you're in a relationship, just because you have a relationship, doesn't mean you have to be in a relationship. Those are two different things. Your
Who
relationship
do
as
you,
a co-parent.
yeah, who do you think is doing good work or savvy or is a wise one about changing policy at the state level?
So, I'm gonna toot my own horn first, right? So, because that's kind of
Yeah,
where So I think we're intentional about that. But I do think that there's others. I think that now that she's retired, I'm not exactly sure what the strength of the organization still is. But South Carolina did a great job at getting the state of South Carolina engaged in the work of fatherhood at a
Yeah,
state
yeah,
level,
yeah.
right?
She was fabulous.
Yeah, I want
Yeah,
to do that in Georgia. I want a
right.
statewide Georgia system in Georgia. I think that the jury is out on Ohio just because of the nature of what they're doing and the small amounts of money that they're distributing that is not sustainable
Yeah.
programmatic money over time. And they also kind of started out looking at um, paternity care, maternity care, and those kind of early childhood development things. And now they're expanding a little bit. So the jury is out on
Mm-hmm.
the state of Ohio.
Right.
New York failed miserably. When I left, it left. When Robert Doar left, it left. When David Hansel left, it left. And that typically is what happened with fatherhood programs. And that is when the champion leaves, everybody else goes because nobody wants to do anything with it. Outside of those, and so locally, um, Anthem in Dallas is doing a great job at impacting and having conversations at the state level.
Okay.
A non-grantee, Tory in Dallas as well.
Who?
Tory, Tori, Tory. They are a reentry program within the Potter's House, T.D. Jakes' church. And they are kicking up a lot of dust in the state of Texas right now, specifically for fatherhood programs that are working with formerly incarcerated individuals
Mm-hmm. Okay.
in Ohio. And so, and I'm
What do
still,
you think about the Dad's Caucus, the new congressional effort? Have you the new congressional caucus? Any feeling about them?
I haven't heard anything about that at all. I have to write that down. The Dad Caucus.
Yeah, I'll send
Mhm.
you something on Dad Caucus. And Rufus is the guy in you don't know
Yep. Yes, I
Pennsylvania?
remember Rufus. Yes, absolutely. I remember.
You should
Oh, you
get
know
him
somebody
on.
else? Somebody else. I forgot about them. And these guys are under the radar as well. And they also got some legislation moved in Maryland. And that's 100 Fathers, Frank Malone in DC. He's out of DC, but they have a state representative in Maryland, Jill. I can't remember Jill's last name, but they have gotten some legislation moving in Maryland. And if I'm not mistaken, they actually got the commission started. It's just not funded. And so it's in legislation to create the Fatherhood Commission in Maryland, but it's not funded. And I think they have a volunteer person who's overseeing it, but the department itself is underfunded. I have to send you because I know I do have the paperwork that they sent me
Okay,
to do
Frank
that.
Malone, that's good contact
Yeah, yeah,
in,
yeah, yeah. He's really they're extremely passionate.
right.
They are always moving. They get confused sometimes in the state of Maryland, like most people get confused whenever you start dealing with policy to be a father's rights organization. And they're not a father's rights organization. You know, they are simply trying to figure out how to get resources to be able to do more programmatic services in the state of Maryland and in the city of DC. And so I just think that there's a large, I think that you mentioned this earlier. We really have to pay attention to what is happening with HRSA and their early Head Start grants, because their grants
Mhm.
has a requirement in there that their grantees are supposed to serve dads. And so Ken Harris with Night.
Yes, yeah, he's made that a requirement, but the
Mhm.
much larger McV program did not make it a requirement. They proposed to put in a metric about home visiting that would have measured father engagement, but when the final regulations came out, they dropped it. And
Mm,
I think David Oles, I bet, was instrumental in getting rid of that.
wow. So
I
there's a
think
lot. there's a lot out
Yeah,
there. There's a lot for us to cover. Let's be intentional about,
yeah,
and
yeah,
anytime
yeah,
that anything
for
that you
sure.
have in terms of reports that I follow, I read all of your email, your newsletters that come to me
Okay,
just so I can
okay.
stay on
Well,
top
we'll
of what's
do
going
that.
on.
And I'd like to actually do a webinar on policy and sort of highlight some patterns that we see and talk about how we can how to do a better job of trying to change policy at the state level. The federal government policy at the federal level is so, right now, nothing can get through. We're just so divided and contentious.
Hmm.
Nothing's going to get through.
Hmm.
So the only hope, in a way, is working at the state level.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think there's a better chance at getting it moving at the state level. The one thing I did want to ask you before I ask you for all of your contact information and folks can get in touch with you, and this is a conversation that is now arising. In fact, we're actually planning a virtual conference in June around mental health, and so it's
Uh-huh.
one of the conversations that we're not having or we have not had extensively around addressing mental health of fathers and what that looks like and how that impacts their ability to be responsible dads. I always draw into this story of Michael Scott in South Carolina
Mm-hmm.
as the guy that I point to when it comes to mental health and child support. You know, here's a 50-year-old man gets pulled over by the police because of a tail light,
Mm-hmm.
and he
Mm-hmm.
gets out of the car and he runs, and he
Mm-hmm.
is shot and killed that day.
Mm-hmm.
And when the story came out, it was because he thought he was getting ready to get arrested for a child support
Mm-hmm.
warrant. And my question was, how can child support become such a fear factor that it makes a 50-year-old person run away from a policeman? That's
It's,
has
the child support program is so incredibly powerful. It really takes your breath away. And people don't know about it. It's invisible. But when you think of new hire reporting, you know, you move to Colorado, in 2 weeks, Colorado will, child support agency will have been notified that you have an order from Georgia for, 500 or whatever per week, and it will be transferred to your new employer if you're in the system, and you will have wage withholding. New hire reporting, people don't get it. They don't understand the extent of license suspension and how many things can be suspended, financial attachments, all of this. It's huge. It's big brother. It's tremendous. And people don't get it. They don't know. It's hidden. Don't you think?
absolutely not the power. I used to listen. I remember when I first started working at child support in New York, and I was having a conversation with one of the directors there about something, and we were talking about the history of child support. And then Lee was his name. He's retired now, but he was in child support since like like when child support started, like '70s. That's how far he went
Yeah.
back. And he
Yeah.
told me one day, he said, Kenny, he said, people forget that one of the directives with respect to child support was that it be that it become more feared by people than the IRS. That was the directive. That child support was supposed to be more feared to people than the IRS.
Yeah.
Think about
I
that
believe that.
as a motivator, right? To put things in place. And I think even today, there are still counties in New York State. I haven't seen one here in Georgia. I haven't seen them in a while. But there were counties in New York State that still put the faces of people on pizza
Yeah,
boxes.
posters, the most wanted. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
seen those. They still have those things. They're
yeah,
miserable, but they still have it. But you walk in any child support agency, and people can tell you down to the penny how much they collected, and it's drilled down to the individual worker. And, you see these little charts and that's the metric. That's the metric. I'm saying, let's change the metric. If we want to change our value, if we want to change the image, if we want to change what's on the street, let's change how we measure the program and reward it and incentivize humanity and being a program that's preventive and that's responsive, as opposed to, just a collection.
Absolutely.
Purely a collection.
So tell everybody how they can get in touch with you, how they can find you, how they can get your great reports, all that good stuff.
I'm at J.S. Pearson at Center for Policy Research, all one word, .org. And that's how they can get in touch with me. Email, I know I'm a dinosaur. I'm not on all these other social, I'm just
TikTok,
juggling.
you don't have a TikTok account?
I've got 8 grandchildren. I work, I do everything. And that's how people can reach me. So.
All right. So thank you so much for joining I Am Dad.
It was fun, Kenny.
I'll be your host, Kenneth Braswell. We will be doing this again. Let's
cook things up together. Okay.
Absolutely. Let's make it happen. You
all
take
right.
care.
Go Brooklyn.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am Dad, period.